So I am really thrilled to welcome back. I don't even know how many times we've had Jillian now because she's fabulous and we keep inviting her back. So we love having her. She is a first generation college student and she understands the power of a quality education. She has dedicated her career to ensuring that students have the tools to use history to advocate for themselves. She's worked in New York City public schools for over a decade. She's taught 5 through 12 in both American and global history. But I love this. She says her greatest career achievement is getting 80 tickets for Hamilton for her students, which is near and dear to my heart. I love that show. Jillian has worked with graduate students as well who are studying to be social studies teachers, and she's currently the Associate Director of History for Achievement First Middle School, supporting history teachers across the network. She's a very long time activist through her group Roots to Revolution, and she really wants to teach adults to feel more empowered, and to engage in their communities, which is what Red, Wine, and Blue is all about. We want people to engage in their communities. So we are, like I said, always thrilled to have Jillian. She has a bachelor's degree in international affairs from Lafayette College and a master's of education from Pace University. So Jillian, I'm going to turn it over to you and I'm going to spotlight you.
I have to say that I was so inspired by the number of signups, the people who were feeling resolved to make change in 2025 who joined tonight. So thank you. It really warmed my heart and it really makes me so appreciative of this community. And I think in these times, what we need most is community. Roots Revolution is an organization that myself and two other history teachers founded in 2020 to teach adults history that may have been glossed over in their education, trying to teach an unwhitewashed version of American history, really making sure we elevate Black history and women's history and LGBTQ history. In the election year and now we've been talking a lot about politics and helping people break down really complex issues. So I'm excited tonight to talk to you about the importance of public education, and I'm excited to fight with you for public education. I think a lot of the things we're going to hear tonight are not exciting in terms of the effect and the impact that's going to have on our students. But what I'm excited to do is to defend our students, and I think that we're going to do that together. So I do want to give you that warning that I don't have a ton of good news for you about what's in Project 2025, but I do have at the end of the presentation things you can literally wake up and do tomorrow to help public education and to help teachers. All right, so I want to start off, and I always like to start off this way as a history teacher, of looking to activists in the past that a lot of times we've never heard of, a lot of times whose stories go unheard of and unsung, who always provide me with inspiration. And tonight I want to spotlight a woman named Sarah J. Tompkins Garnett. And she was a woman who lived in New York City in a free Black community. Her father was the founder of the Weeksville community in Brooklyn, which was one of the wealthy free Black communities in New York. And she was the first Black woman to ever serve as a principal in New York City schools. And she served in Brooklyn and Williamsburg for 37 years as a principal. She also lived in the West Village, actually in a neighborhood that was formerly known as Little Africa because it was a really prominent Black neighborhood. She also worked at an integrated school later on when New York City schools had to integrate in 1883. She was also a member of the Equal Suffrage League Foundation in the 1880s. She was a founding member of the Niagara Movement, which was a precursor to the NAACP, and she worked really closely with Du Bois. She also worked really closely with Ida B. Wells, who was also a former teacher before she became a journalist, and spotlighted the problem with lynching going on in the country. And both Garnett and Ida B. Wells worked really hard to raise awareness about lynching across the country and to also get Black women the rights to suffrage so they could fight against violence that was happening to Black Americans across the country. And when New York City did pass the law to integrate schools, there was a lot of resistance. And Sarah Garnett fought to keep those schools open. She fought to make sure that her Black students did not lose their spot in school. The city also wanted to fire all the Black Black teachers who were in the Black schools and replaced them with white teachers when they did the integration process, which also happened in the 1950s. And Garnett made sure that those teachers kept their jobs and made sure that her students still had a spot in school. And what I want to highlight with this story is that in our history, we have faced so many challenges to public education. And there are so many people like Sarah Garnett, and I hope that you get this little piece tonight and then you go look up her story and read more about her, who have fought for change, who we can learn from, and who inspire me to remember that the 1880s was a much harder time to be alive than 2025. And I think what that reminds me is if they could fight, we can too. And that our ancestors fought for us, and it is now our job to fight for our future children. And I think that I hope, these inspirational stories who often get overlooked in history give us that motivation to move forward. So I want us to just get a little personal for a minute, and you don't have to share this in the chat, but I do just want you to think a little bit about this, and then I'm going to share my own story. But you came here because a lot of you are teachers, your parents, you're married to teachers. So I just want you to think for a moment about all the ways you've benefited from education and higher education, and how your children are benefiting from public education, and even how you benefited from affirmative action and student loan programs. And I think I even mean that as a white person. I benefited from affirmative action because I'm a white woman, and women benefited from affirmative action. I also benefited from affirmative action by having a diverse group of students in my classrooms that I learned so much from. And so I just want us to pause for a minute and just think about those questions, because what we're going to have to do in the coming months when we're fighting for education is really help explain how our education system benefits us, how it benefits our communities, how it benefits our children, how it benefits everyone. And I think that these are important questions for us to think about. And so I'd like to just share a little bit about my own story and then connect that back to policies and what this means to have policies that help support education. So I am the first one in my family to go to college. My father was a janitor at the New York Stock Exchange. My mother got her GED and then later became a real estate agent. I went to a magnet high school. That was a public high school in New Jersey. That was extremely incredible. And I got into Lafayette College. I saw someone in the beginning said they were from the Lehigh Valley. And Lafayette College is a really selective college. And because Lafayette College has a strong endowment, I was able to go to Lafayette. My mom was a single mother at that time because my father had passed away when I was 16. I was able to go to Lafayette College cheaper than Rutgers, which was the state that I was living in, because of their endowment. And they gave me so many grants that it actually equated to the state tuition. While I was at Lafayette College, I got to study abroad, and I got to go to the Sorbonne in Paris, which is a really prestigious university. And now I got accepted into the Fulbright program. I'm going to Singapore this summer to study with other educators. And my life, in comparison to my parents, economically, in terms of the access to resources I have, access to therapy, access to healthcare, is drastically different. Both of my parents have passed away. My dad died when I was 16. My mom died when I was 22. And I think that that has led me to survive my education. And why education is so transformative in this country. The education system is not the great equalizer, but the education system in this country can make a story like mine possible. The education system in this country can turn around an entire generation, right? And change their economic outcomes, change their trajectory. And I believe that the reason why people want to attack education is because they don't want those possibilities for marginalized groups of people. They don't want those possibilities for women, for Black Americans, for Native Americans. They want to keep a certain group of people, predominantly rich white men, in power. And that is why they're creating policies to attack education. And that's a bold statement that I'm making, and I don't make that statement lightly. But education is really powerful. And that's why it's being attacked. And I really feel like I'm a testament to that. It's why I've committed my career to working in Title I schools. And I'll share one other story about a student that I had in 2016. He was the first person born in the United States. His family was born in Ecuador. He graduated having passed 7 AP courses with a 5. So he got a semester finished of college. He got a 1590 on his SATs and got into Brown's accelerated medical school program. So he didn't have to take the entrance exam into medical school. So he was already accepted into Brown and into their medical school program. That is another example of how education is transformative to an entire family. And so that's why I believe so deeply in this and why we're going to fight so hard for education. And I'm sure, and people are sharing this in the chat, and I really appreciate you. Many of you have those stories. That's why you're teachers. That's why you're here. So I wanted to start with the most cursory overview of the Department of Education and the Federal Department of Education and what it provides for us. So it provides anti-discrimination and civil rights protections. It ensures funding for students with disabilities. It makes sure that low-income schools, Title I schools, have funding. And it's the predominant arm that provides federal student loans. Project 2025 wants to dismantle the Department of Education. And so in that, it wants to take away all the protections that the Department of Education provides. Now, there's also some other things that are really important that Project 2025 wants to diminish. They want to eliminate Title I funding, which provides funding for low-income schools. They want to eliminate Title IX, which is the law that allows women to participate in sports. It allows women protection against sexual assault on college campuses. So I'm also an adjunct professor. I had to take a class on Title IX to make sure my students were protected. I was a mandated reporter, right? There's things around that protect students. It provides equality. Title IX also has been expanded to help LGBTQ community as well, LGBTQ students. They want to eliminate the Department of Education and redistribute responsibilities to the Department of Health and Human Services. The Department of Health and Human Services already has enough to deal with. Our departments are overwhelmed. So that's not really a great option at all for us. They also want to redistribute public tax dollars to go to private schools and private voucher programs for private charter schools. So what that would do is allow parents to send their kids to a private school with tax money. That doesn't sound like a bad idea, and they often title this as parent choice. But the problem with a lot of the private schools that they're supporting, they're religious schools, they're also sometimes for-profit charter schools. It creates a very capitalistic system within a public education system that doesn't benefit all students. They also want to eliminate DE&I programming and punish schools who teach CRT. Now, we know a lot of you maybe, yes, and some people are saying not all charter schools are for-profit. That is definitely not true. I work for a charter organization that is a public charter organization. So there's a lot of differences amongst charter schools. And then they also want to tax college endowments. That's in the Trump tax plan. And we're going to talk a little bit about what all these things mean. I bolded the few that I'm going to focus on tonight because all of these things are detrimental, but there's a few things I want us to really prioritize in our advocacy. So the ones I'm going to focus on a lot tonight are Title I funding, taxing college endowments, and the impact on students with disabilities. Those are the ones I really want to prioritize. I also want to highlight that one of the goals of Project 2025 is about cabinet selection picks. And this applies to not just education, but to everything. The goal of Project 2025 is to dismantle the federal institutions and the federal bureaucracy and to take away nonpartisan people from those institutions. So you might be like blinking and like kind of going into shock every time you see a cabinet pick and go, why is this person so unqualified for this job? Like, how could he pick someone so unqualified for this job? That's actually deliberate. That's actually the plan. He wants people to run all the institutions who have no expertise in the institutions so they could run the institutions into the ground. Because during Trump's first term, when he asked the Secretary of Defense to deploy the military against protesters in Minnesota, protesting the death of George Floyd, he said, no, that's unconstitutional. He stood up to Trump. Trump no longer wants those guardrails. So he's deliberately picking people without expertise, and he's deliberately picking people who will be loyal to him. And so in that sense, right, how do you foster loyalty? You also foster loyalty with people who don't have expertise because then they can get another better job. So if you're unqualified, you're going to stay loyal to Trump because this is the highest position you're going to get. So I also just want to juxtapose the differences between the current Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, and Linda McMahon, who's the nominee for the Secretary of Education right now. Cardona was an elementary school teacher. He was the youngest principal to ever be a principal in the state of Connecticut. He was a first generation college student. He was an adjunct professor at the College of Education at the University of Connecticut. He was a superintendent. He was also Ned Lamont's commissioner of education and oversaw the state of Connecticut's plan during COVID-19 to make sure the schools and students were safe. And then he was promoted to Secretary of Education. So literally had every job possible in the education system. Linda McMahon was on a school board in Connecticut for 1 year. She lied about her resume. Said she was a graduate student of education. She was a graduate student of French. And she donated to Sacred Heart University. And that's where her education experience stops. She was never a teacher. She was never a principal. And we most commonly know her for being the head of the WWF. So detrimental in the fact that she has no expertise in education, right? And she has also been known to give to a lot of private schools, to give to a lot of charter schools. So also not someone who's really a big proponent of the general public education system. Now, I want to focus first on the consequences of taxing an endowment. So the number one priority, and this is why I want to prioritize this first, the number one thing that the Republicans want to ram through, and I say ram through deliberately, through Congress, is the Trump tax plan. And they even want to integrate all of the deportation plan into the same bill. And the reason why they want to do that is because they want to do a lot of awful things in this tax plan. And so they want to get it done quickly, and they want us to not really pay attention to that. Now, how does that affect education? The Republicans have wanted to dismantle higher education and trust in higher education. That's why they had those hearings questioning all of the college presidents. It's why they've been attacking DE and I. It's all part of this larger thing to say that college education isn't helpful, because if you don't have a college education, you don't have an educated electorate. An educated electorate will let politicians get away with, an uneducated electorate will let politicians get away with things. Now, there has been a movement that's been really positive, but you see these two headlines here, that colleges are enacting and using their endowments for. So schools like Harvard and MIT that have enormous endowments have been able to now offer completely free tuition for families who make below a certain amount of money. And in some cases, like in the case of MIT, the threshold is $200,000. So if your family makes less than $200,000, you get to go to MIT for free, which is actually incredible. And many colleges are moving in this direction because they have such big endowments. If you tax a college endowment, This is no longer an option. Kids can't go to for free. What I just told you about how I got to go to Lafayette for half on grants that made it cheaper than state tuition would not have been possible. My student who I told you about, who got into Brown, it was cheaper for him to go to Brown than CUNY because of all the money he got from Brown, because Brown had such a huge endowment. And that was like mind blowing to me when I was a college, like when I was a teacher working with kids getting into college. I didn't realize like that sometimes the more expensive schools are actually better financially for low income students because they have more money to give away. Well, if we start taxing college endowments, that's no longer an issue. That is an immediate way to ensure that marginalized students do not get to go to the most elite schools in the country. So the first thing we must do is call our senators to make sure that this is not in the tax plan. And the senators I want us to target, because the senators have 6-year terms that go beyond Trump, they're less afraid. They're more willing to take that stance. But you need to you need to call them to make sure this is not in the tax plan. So this is the number one thing that is concerning to me in Project 2025 and in the Trump's tax plan. The other issue that is going to be catastrophic for our students is what it would do to student loan debt. So I just want to give you a moment to read through these bullets and just process them for a second. So these stats are from the Center for American Progress. What essentially, just very quickly, what it would do is it would really make it prohibitively expensive for students to take out loans. It would make it really hard for student loan debt, would be astronomical. It would not cancel student loan debt for public workers. So it would just make college access, again, a lot harder and a lot more difficult to obtain. So this would be a really important thing to address, to think about how we can't have this happen to our students when people are already struggling so much with student loans. Okay, the next thing that's actually really, really important, again, about money and about funding, is Title I funding. So Title I funding essentially helps to, so let me backtrack a second. In most of America, education funding is based on property taxes. And in some places that's based on like counties. In some places that's based on towns, but it's all based on property taxes. So if you live in a wealthier neighborhood, your schools get more money. And that has created an already segregated school system. It's created an already unfair, inequitable school system in the United States. And that is across the United States, whether you live in a red state or a blue state. New York City is one of the most segregated urban school districts in the country. And we, claim to be a progressive district. So this issue is pervasive throughout the United States. And so Title I funding was created in the 60s as a civil rights initiative because many of the people who were staunch segregationists didn't want to integrate schools, and they didn't want to finance the schools that were being integrated. And so to try to counteract this, in Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program, in his War on Poverty program, he created Title I funding to fund low-income school districts. And it was also to counter this idea of funding being solely based on property taxes. And so what this means is in Project 2025, they want to completely eliminate Title I funding. I'm going to say it again, they want to completely eliminate Title I funding. So what this means is the students in America who live the deepest in poverty would receive the least amount of funding for their schools. They're going to gut the schools. To give you an example, I looked up in preparation for this talk, how many school districts in New Jersey received Title I funding. It was a 26-page document. So even if you think your neighborhood is in an area where it's wealthy, this is going to affect so many kids. And over half of our country, students go to school that receive Title I funding. Now, as a teacher who works in only Title I schools, We already don't have soap. We already don't have pencils. We already don't have paper. So if you take away any money, it's going to be catastrophic. What it's going to lead to is, if you did take away this money in theory, bigger class sizes, which means class sizes are going to become unmanageable. So more teachers are going to quit. We already have a national teacher shortage. You have two bigger class sizes, kids are not going to learn as much. There's going to be increased violence in schools. More students are going to slip through the cracks in terms of their learning. And, this is going to really exacerbate the problem. And so I think this is not what's being talked about the most in Project 2025 in terms of the education plan. And I honestly think this is one of the most important things that we need to pay attention to. And I said in the beginning that I really believed that this attack in Project 2025 was a strategy to uphold rich white men. And I think what you're seeing here, and I see some people like asking the chat, how is it justified to tax college endowments, but not to tax churches and not to tax this? It's because they want to hurt people in the lower classes in America. We have to come to terms with the fact that this is really actually pretty evil. And I think and I say that because I think we're a lot of good people in this country, and a lot of people are like, that can't be. Like, why would they want to do this? This doesn't make sense. And I think we have to accept that they do. And someone said it this in the chat, this is how they maintain and uphold power. And I think we have to accept that sad truth that this is where they are at. And I think when you look at these proposals, you see when you follow the money, who is it hurting? And it's hurting our most vulnerable. And I think I've also heard a lot of people, and I think this is a defense mechanism. They say, well, I won't necessarily be hurt, right? Like that's not going to affect me. We can't take that approach either. We have to know that if the most marginalized in America are taken care of, everyone is lifted up. And so if every school has Title I funding and Title I schools are doing amazing, that means everybody's school is doing amazing. If kids are challenged in school and getting an amazing education, then when your kids get to college and meet each other, they're in a competitive environment where their ideas are challenged and they're intellectuals. And so we have to remember that all kids learning benefits all of us. I've also heard people say, and you might have heard this before, I had my ex-husband lived in Long Island, and his aunt said to me, I pay so much money in taxes and I don't even have kids. And all the money for taxes goes to the schools. And I said to her, do you go to the doctor? She said, yeah. Said, do you go to the supermarket? Do you get driven around in cabs? Do you go on the trains? And she said, yeah. I said, are you protected by the police? She said, yeah. I said, who educated them? It was the teachers in your community. So if we have an uneducated electorate who are our nurses, who are our doctors, who are our Uber drivers, who are our train operators, we are not safe. Crime is going to amplify, right? People are not going to be protected. And so I also need us, you are all people, it seems like a lot of you are really invested for personal reasons in education, but we also have to make other people understand that everyone has something at stake here if our population is uneducated. The last thing I want to talk about that I think is also really critical that we have to protect is our students with disabilities. And someone said this in the chat earlier, is this the IDEA Act? So the IDEA Act requires that schools provide federal education, federal protections for students with disabilities. And it's under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So a lot of you who are educators probably have heard of, oh, my student has a 504 plan. A 504 plan is like an IEP, an individual education plan. And what that does for students, if a student has a disability, and those disabilities can range from dyslexia to autism to more severe emotional disabilities to getting therapy in school. It's just a total range, and it helps all those students. Yes, thank you, Debbie. Like it's the 504 plan is separate from the IEP. I misspoke. And so what we are going to have an issue is students will lack these protections, and they won't have their accommodations met. And so I think that it's really important that we make sure that students with disabilities are protected, and Project 2025 does not gut that. Our students with disabilities already have, their rights rights taken away. They're often not protected in schools. And so I want to make sure that this is also something we're aware of, that if we gut the federal Department of Education, we're not going to have our students with disabilities protected. So a lot of you probably already know this, but we already have so many existing problems in education. So school segregation persists across America. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, students are further behind in all subjects. This is from a 2018 statistic from the Southern Poverty Law Center, but in 2018, only 8% of American seniors could name that the cause of the Civil War was slavery. This was done by the National Civics Education Project at a Tufts University. They found that only 26% of Americans can name the functions of the three branches of government. The national average starting teacher salary is $44,000, and the average teacher salary is $69,000. I don't know if you remember this Time Magazine article, but this was from a teacher. They did a profile on teachers and teacher salaries, and this woman had to donate plasma in order to pay her bills. She was a teacher in Oklahoma, and she was making $30,000 a year. What's also horrific about these salary levels is most teachers have master's degrees. And so, I think they're like one of the most highly educated professionals who don't get paid what they're worth. And I think what we're seeing right now is we have a national teacher shortage. And a big reason why we have a national teacher shortage is because people don't want to go into the field because they know it's hard work. It's long hours for low pay, right? That's what's the incentive there if they don't, have that, So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And so, these problems in Project 2025 are only going to exacerbate the existing problems that we have in education. So I want to talk about just some of the things that we can do. So, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, and a lot of you already are teachers, so this one doesn't apply to you. But if you're not teachers, having conversations with more teachers about what are the things that are really problems in education. I find across the board, even progressive politicians don't prioritize the right things in terms of fighting for educators. And so I think that sometimes people need to hear from us. And I'll give you an example. So I was very involved in local New York City politics, and there was a man running for city council who was an amazing man, really progressive. And he was hosting a workshop to get input on public schools. And it was at 11 a.m. Now, all of you who are teachers will know, what teacher has time to go to a workshop at 11 a.m. in the middle of their school day? Like, if you do even have a prep during that time, and I said to him, I was like, no one's going to come to this and give you feedback at 11 a.m. So he's like, oh, I need to have it later. And I said, yeah, at the end of the school day, if you want teachers to come. And he did, because he was an amazing person and like wanted the feedback from teachers, but like, they don't know, right? And so I think what we have to do, and they can't know about every issue, right? As politicians, they can't be experts, even the good ones. And so I think what we have to do is make sure teachers' voices are amplified. We need to tell them about the problems that we're having. We need to go. And because teachers are overworked and overwhelmed, we need to make sure our friends and our families are also doing that for us. I think there's three things. I keep Chuck Schumer's Senate, his phone number in my phone, in my contacts, and Kirsten Gillibrand and Congressman Dan Goldman in my contacts, in my phone. And I do that so I can call them right away. We need to be calling to oppose the taxing the college endowments. We need to be calling to oppose McMahon's nomination, and we need to be calling to oppose the decimation of the Department of Education. It's unlikely that they can get rid of the Department of Education, but we need to make our voices heard. After Roe got overturned, I really started to believe anything was possible. And so I think that it's really important that we take their threats really seriously, but also hope for the best. I see people saying in the chat, we need to write to any moderate Republican senators, and I want to push on that. In Kentucky, there was a ballot initiative for private vouchers that supported increasing private vouchers, which is in Project 25. It was voted down by 67%. Kentucky receives more federal funding than progressive states. The red states will be hurting their constituents very, very deeply if this is passed. So please don't say, oh, my person is a staunch Republican, I'm not calling. No. And they need to hear from you. They need to hear from you because they count the number of people who complain, and that's how they make their decisions. And you know who calls? MAGA calls. MAGA calls all the time. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets on Twitter and they all call. We need to call, and we need to stop believing that it doesn't work. It works. And that's the only way it works. And we have to fight because these policies, why Trump hid behind this and said, I'm not attached to it, is because they're bad and they're unpopular. Nobody wants this. Most people do not want this. And so we have that on our side. We have to fight for it. We also have to, attend local school board meetings. And we're not going to get into this tonight, but the good news also is that a lot of state policies a lot of education policies are made on the state level. And so it's important also that we hold state representatives accountable. And then I think one of the other important things is always advocating for higher teacher pay. Most teachers have not received pay increases in a very long time, and that will make a huge difference for education. Another thing I want to talk about is just this idea of mutual aid. We need to get really close to our communities, and we need to start just supporting schools and teachers. So if you're not already a teacher, and a lot of you are, but I think dropping off school supplies at a local school, hosting fundraisers for Title I schools in your neighborhood. There's, for example, in my area of Brooklyn, this school in Park Slope that is extremely wealthy. They hold a fundraiser every year and they redistribute all the funds to Title I schools in the neighborhood. And I think that's really powerful. It's not enough, but it's certainly a start. If you're a parent, join the PTA, and again, share fundraising with low-income schools, not just for the schools that have the funds and the financial means. If you have the financial means, start a scholarship fund. My sister and I started a small scholarship fund in honor of our parents in her town in New Jersey, West Orange, and we designated that it has to go to a first-generation college student because we both are first-generation college students, and it's not a lot. It's like, $500 a year, but it pays for someone's books, and that's something that we do. And then every year on my parents' birthdays, we fundraise and people donate, and we get more money than that, and we personally make those donations. Also, just to list out school supplies that teachers always need. I'm sure other teachers in the chat can put them in, but soap, hand sanitizer, next time you're at Costco, throw in some extra ones, granola bars, small snacks, pads, tampons. Like, these are things that teachers always need, run out of, pens, pencils, recess equipment, things you can give to schools. Another thing, this amazing copy paper. Yeah, thank you, Beverly. If you walked up to a school in your neighborhood and dropped off 3 reams of paper, those teachers would be ecstatic. It's actually such a low bar for what you can do for teachers. Direct volunteering, some things we can do in our community, reading, reviewing college application essays, tutoring students in their academic subjects, helping if you have people who work for corporations. Something really cool that Goldman Sachs did for my friend's school is they got a bunch of corporate volunteers, and in September they all came and helped set up these classrooms. And that was amazing because when they were helping set up the classrooms and setting up the furniture, the Goldman volunteers, the teachers got to work on their lesson plans and other things. So if you have friends in a corporation, like corporations have like Day of Action volunteering, see if they want to help. get volunteers in your community. I think other thing is too is start conversations with families and friends about what you learned tonight. Don't let perfect get in the way of progress. You know, a lot of us are sometimes nervous, like, oh, I don't have all the details right, or what do I say? Make sure you just start the conversation. We have Google, we can look up all the details if we need to, but we got to start getting the word out there and sharing. The other thing that I'm happy to offer up, I did a talk for Red, Wine, and Blue on Project 2025 in the summer, and then I got invited to Iowa and Long Island and Virginia to give other talks. It was incredible. So if you liked tonight's presentation, if you thought it was useful and you want me to come and talk to your community, either virtually or if I can in person, I really, really would love to do that and really connect with all of you.
Someone asked, and this is an interesting question, is any other country doing these kinds of things?
Um, Not to my knowledge. I think that's an amazing question. I think a lot of countries are actually doing the opposite. Someone wrote Hungary. I don't know enough about Hungary's education system to speak to that, Suze. But if you do and want to share more in the chat, that would be amazing. What I will say is that other countries are like a lot further ahead of us in terms of where they're going. And so, for example, in Finland, students are learning how to spot misinformation in fourth grade.
Mhm.
They're reading news sources, current events in fourth grade.
Amazing.
In America, in some of the schools I've worked with, we are not even having a social studies block in fourth grade because we have to teach reading and math. And so I think we have to like really start to look to other countries. It's one of the reasons I'm going to Singapore in the summer to see what other countries are doing and bring those policies back here. But yeah, amazing question. Thank you.
So, can the president actually eliminate these programs without Congress?
Great question. That's why I keep emphasizing the answer is no, flat out no. That's why I keep emphasizing calling the senators and calling your House of Representatives because the Congress has to approve the money for these things to get dismantled. He cannot do these things through executive order, but we have to stay alert. So, for example, this tax plan that's coming out, there's going to be literally 1,000 things that are terrible about it, and so we have to really fight for those things. So it's really critical that you call senators. And like I said, I think senators have an invested interest in not cutting these programs because they directly benefit their constituents. And so I do think we can win on this because it's in no one's interest across the country to defund education, mostly, if people are paying attention.
So there's a fellow Ohioan in the because Julie and I are from Ohio, in the chat, and she asked if writing to Moreno, who's our new senator, replacing Senator Brown, which we hated to lose, and we'll have another new senator, which will probably likely be Husted. She said writing to them seems useless, but what is your thought process on writing to these folks who seem, entrenched in these ideas?
Yeah. So my friend worked in Congress as a legislative aide. And what he told me, he was the guy that picked up the phone when you called. And he said that what his job was to log how many times someone called. And once it got to a certain threshold, that's when he had to report it to the senator. And that's when the senator took action. Part of what people don't understand is why the reason why the NRA had so much power was not just the lobbying money, but was the number of calls. Because if they hear that you're not going to vote for them, you're their constituent. And it really does matter that you make these calls. And I all I can say is like that's what I have heard from that. And I also think what they care about is getting reelected. So if they're hearing from their constituents that they're not going to get reelected, they're going to make that change. The other thing I think to our advantage, particularly with senators, they're less likely to cower to Trump. We're seeing a lot of that because they have a 6-year term. The way a senator is doing the calculus is I'm going to outlive Donald Trump. They are going to be more willing to take a stand on these issues because he's going to be gone and they're not going to be gone. And so I do also think we need to keep that in mind. And the margins are really small. He keeps saying he had a mandate. He did not have a mandate. They're going to lose, if they lose 3 House reps and 4 senators, they're done. And so that's not many. And I think the other thing is reaching out to, like I have friends that live in Maine. I'm like, have you called Susan Collins? Have you called her? And so I think it's just also making sure that people who are in those critical states also make the calls.
I will attest to the fact, as a former senior legislative aide in the State House, that
There
those,
you
it's the same thing. So make those calls. Because believe me, the other side makes those calls.
I also say too, and I'll just add one more thing on this note. I also call like Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand when they do the right thing, because you know what, they're humans too, and they need some punch in their fight. So I'll call when they do the right thing, because I think we got to keep them going, keep them motivated.
Um, so then the next one is there a way to look up schools that get Title I funding?
Yes, that's a great question. So if you go to like your state government website, so that's where I found the New Jersey list. So you can find the districts that get Title I funding. So I just Googled like schools in New Jersey that get Title I funding, and I Googled like schools in New York that get Title I funding. It'll also probably say it on a lot of schools' website, usually designated a Title I school. If you're also in like a big district like New York or an urban district, it will say it on like the schools district website. You can look up their data. So you just have to do some deep Googling. Also feel free to email me and I can help you Google if you want to. It's a little hard to find the data, but it's there.
So you talked about 504 and IEP. Can you send the reference in Project 2025 where it says it's going to eliminate it? Because that person said that they were expressly told that that was not going to happen. So yeah, they want to be able to have teeth in their argument.
Yeah, so that's one of those things where that's a really great point. And also thank you. Who was it? Someone corrected me on because I said they were the same thing. A 504 plan and an individual education plan is not the same thing. And I misspoke when I was talking. So thank you for the person who corrected that in the chat. So they overlap and they provide protections for students with disabilities, but they are very different. So thank you for pointing that out. What is the issue with that is there's a lot of things in Project 2025 that aren't directly stated, but will be an implication of Project 2025. So because the Federal Department of Education is responsible for that program, if the Department of Federal Education were to shut down, that will be severely limited and it will be sent over to a different department and that funding will be cut and it will be attacked. Another example of this is they say, oh, we don't say anywhere in Project 2025 that we're going to eliminate abortion. They don't. But what they say is we're going to revive the Comstock law, which if you revive the Comstock law, which eliminates the ability to transfer information about birth control, well, you've just eliminated abortions. So I think that that is the issue. So, and how the IEPs will be like directly affected is there won't be federal protections for those students. And so a lot of times what happens in schools is people skirt around protections for students and parents can sue districts for not providing those protections for students. And people take IEPs and 504 plans very, very seriously because there's those legal teeth behind it. So if there isn't that there and there isn't the additional funding, and the federal government also supplies extra funding for students with disabilities. So if it isn't there, that's when they're going to really be, it's really going to be gutted. And so it's going to be detrimental.
Yeah, I'm going to skip. Oh,
no, keep going.
I was going to say, I'm going to skip ahead to, there's been several requests for a script. You know, what do people say when they call? And so if you've got some verbiage that you can share with Julie to share that she can share out to the group, that would be great.
Yep, I will definitely do that. What I will also say is like, sometimes I call and I say, I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z. And I maybe don't know that much about it, but just even saying, and Julie, maybe you can even speak to this more as a legislative aide, like even saying I'm concerned about mass deportation and I don't want it to happen, like is enough. You don't have to know, like, I don't want you to say this law. They still log it. And of course, it's a little bit better if you have more specifics. But if you just say, I don't want the Department of Education to be defunded and I don't support the education plans in Project 2025, like that is going to get logged. And you don't, again, that's where I'm like, don't let perfects get in the way of progress. Call. And I don't know, Julie, if that resonates with you as someone who has the experience.
It does. So how often should folks call? That's another question here.
I mean, if you have the time every day, that's why I also said, like, I really, it's just like,
True.
how much do you want to dedicate to this emotional energy? How much do you have? I also don't want you to burn out because this is going to be, we're going to be a long 4 years. But I will just show you my phone, how quickly I can pull it up. Can you see
Mhm.
it? There's Chuck right in my phone, Chuck Schumer, right? And that's how I make it fast. My husband was teasing me. It was like I had just had my coffee and I was calling Dan Goldman. He's like 9:30 in the morning and Jillian's calling Dan. And it's because I've reduced that barrier to making it a habit. I made it easy. It's like getting on the exercise bike. It's like, what you putting out the workout clothes. So I can't, it's changed my life to just put I don't know why it's so simple. Put them in your phone. It takes 3 minutes.
And also, it doesn't hurt to call after hours and leave messages on their recorders, because I've done that before. I've actually had events where I had everybody pick up their phone and call right then and there in the evening. They did, of course, there's nobody there to answer the phone except for the, answering service or, machine, whatever, and a voicemail, and left voicemails and filled their voicemails up.
Yep.
And it was effective. We actually stopped for the first time. Of course, it went through later, but we stopped stand your ground here. So, um, so what if our representatives and senators are actually on our side? Do we still call them?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes. And I say yes, because one, I think they need the motivation. Like, I'll give you an example. Someone said to me, should I call AOC? She's my rep. She's doing, like, I'm so phenomenally proud of her. I'm feeling great. And I said to him, AOC gets death threats every day. So maybe just call her and say thanks for everything you're doing, and I appreciate you. And I think also not all representatives who are Democrats are the same. Eric Adams, my mayor, Democrat. I'll use the Republican phrase, Democrat in name only. He tried to cut the library budget, the education budget 4 times. So, it's like, this is, we have to pay attention that just because they have the D in front of their, next to their party name, it doesn't mean that they're perfect. And so I think we got to just keep paying attention.
And then this is a good one. Can a non-parent join the PTA? And I know a lot of times we'll be talking about school board issues and things on Thursday. If you don't have children in school anymore, you don't have children at all, you're still a taxpayer in those districts. You're a taxpayer in your congressional district. You're a taxpayer in your senatorial district. So, but can you speak to a non-parent joining the PTA?
Yeah, I think they'll probably say no to that. But I think to Julie's point, like definitely go to the school board meetings, definitely go to the school community meetings. I'm sure if you rolled up to a local elementary school in the neighborhood and said, hey, I'd like to really throw a fundraiser for you. Can you connect me with the PTA president? And you have 10 women in your house and you say, we're going to raise $1,000 for the school, they would be thrilled. So I think you can do some of the things that a PTA would do and be like a friend of the PTA, but no, they probably wouldn't necessarily let you know unless you had a child connected to the school. So I see someone say like my grandparents joined the PTA, but not necessarily. Yeah, you have to have a child in the school. But again, like Beverly said, reams of paper. You drop off reams of paper, they're gonna be thrilled. So anything you can do would be great.
So, okay, that was our list of questions. There's a couple more in the chat, but we are over time. Man, this was so informative. Julie, I'm gonna throw it back to you, but thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you as always, Jillian. And Jillian's coming back in February, guys. We're gonna have her for another event. So check that out. It's not up on the website yet. I just want to address one thing I saw in the chat with someone who was asking whether it made more of a difference to call than to write. My answer is no, they log it either way. If you're more comfortable sending an email, go for it. But I do want to emphasize what everyone's been saying. I live in Ohio. I call my senators all the time because it is so important. I have had state senators tell me on gun violence issues, well, only one side is calling. We don't want them to be able to say that to the media, like, oh, I'm only hearing from one side. Even if you know they're gonna not vote your way, make it hard for them. Make them have to like say they had 50% of people calling, on each side or something like that. And the other thing is, like they said, don't make it the end perfect enemy of the good. I literally just call and say, my name is Julie Womack. I live in Mason, Ohio. I'm your constituent. Please vote against this bill. Please vote for this. Please, whatever it might be. That's it. Hang up. You don't have to have everything in line like they just said. So last thing I want to say, so thank you. If you really do want to see a script, the other place you can go is Jess Craven, who has a Substack called Chop Wood, Carry Water. I know many of you follow her and probably came to this event because of her tonight. She always has phone scripts, so that's also a really helpful thing just to look at to get comfortable. But like I said, call after hours, like you guys said, you won't have to talk to anybody. So all right. Everybody have a really great evening. Thank you for the information, Jillian, and we will see you all soon, hopefully.
Thank you, everybody.